of industry on those standards committees, aren't there?
There are industry members. In terms of ratio to non-industry and other interest groups, I'd be speculating.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And so I now welcome Ms. Anne Payton from the Victorian Building Action Group. Record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Yes, my name is Anne Payton, P-A-T-E-N, and I'm the President of the Victorian Building Action Group, Incorporated.
Thank you very much, Ms Payton, and I thank you for appearing here today, and I invite you to make a brief opening statement. I note that you've provided a submission to the inquiry. I note your submission touches on non-conforming building products as well as a number of other issues, cowboy builders, to use your terminology, issues related to tribunals. So I'd be very interested in hearing your comments in respect of the terms of reference of this inquiry, which is the non-conforming building products.
Right.
Thank you.
Look, thank you very much for the invitation to come along here today. I think I'm here maybe to tell an Australian story that's really never been told before. Today, for me and for us, it's virtually the very first time that we've had a voice in any forum. So I really sincerely thank you. And of course, when I say we are all building consumers, every Australian person, particularly if they're an adult, and the children will grow up to be. And I think sometimes people don't realise that. They think if I haven't got a building problem or I'm not extending at the moment, I don't fit into that category. So whether we're attempting to build a new house or an apartment or renovate or extend, do maintenance or repairs, new roof, wiring, whatever, we're all involved in this every day. It saddens me to say that I've spent 2 years in the process of building myself, and I've spent 7 years since researching, trying to assist others and trying to get reform. And the state of the building industry now, 9 years after I began, is far worse. And it's unfortunately very clear to me now, as it wasn't 9 years ago, as a novice, first home building consumer, that I can identify, I think, quite clearly, and I can base that on very substantial proof, both independent reports. I've read virtually everything that's ever been written in the last 20-something years to do with building, every annual report, etc. And I have personal knowledge of 5,000 stories myself, quite apart from all the others I know through reading media articles, etc. So I thought today, if you would give me a few minutes, I'd start with non-conforming building products, move on to what I see as some of the consequences within the overall industry, and maybe explore from my perspective and a consumer perspective, and I think a very knowledgeable one, just how we got to this point in time.
And Ms Payton, I'm very interested in hearing that. I just encourage you to keep your opening statement brief, which is the normal convention, because I'm sure there will be a number of questions that we would like to ask.
Thank you. So I'm from the Victorian Building Action Group, and our slogan, if you like, is we just want what we paid for. And I think that's fair enough. So as a consumer representative and an advocate, I haven't managed to meet, speak or consult with many members of Parliament in my 9 years. I could count it on one hand, I think. And that's because the ministers and public officials generally meet with industry interests. I won't call them industry associations or genuine industry interests, but they do have meetings, and I think the reason that in part we're not consulted is that officially consumers are not considered a stakeholder. So if you look at any written documents from government agencies, they state everyone else is, but we, the people who provide all the money, billions of dollars a year, don't count. And I'm raising this point by way of explanation relating to the non-conforming products, because I see that the way the industry generally operates and the fact that we have much conflict of interest and collusion and, dare I say, corruption, and I'm not saying this is already in many independent reports that go back over the last 15 years, but particularly in 4 that came out between 2011 and 2015 this year. And so if we look at the non-conforming building products and materials within the overall framework of what is not just the Victorian building industry, because I'm very aware and the same models are used and the same problems exist in all the other states. In relation to substandard products, I'm very familiar myself with the situation with cabling, and I'm very disappointed that the way the solution has been put forward, as I understand it, is that the ACCC will spend $80 million of taxpayers' money to pay for the 40,000 buildings that the owners have already paid for, and the builders and surveyors and everybody else can now walk off scot-free. There's a sense of urgency because of, as I understand it, the very real possibility of electrocution and/or fire, and within a short time frame. So, of course, I don't want to see people injured or hurt, but I don't think that the taxpayer should be paying for the builders and the surveyors and the engineers' wrongdoing. In relation to cladding, I just quickly looked yesterday, and this gives us some idea of the seriousness and how widespread this problem is. I've got 3 articles in 2 days here. One is on, this is to do with the flammable cladding in Victoria. I've got one on the harvest department, where the owners are now going to have to spend, we don't know how much, but we certainly know, I think the Lacrosse building, the owners have just been ordered to pay $20 million. This is exactly the same cladding, and it's called the harvest department. Then we've got the hospitals, so we've got the women's hospital that's already functioning, and we've got the new hospital, the cancer centre, being built with the same cladding currently as we speak. So I think there's a real message here, and I heard the gentleman before mentioning words like certification and regulation and robust, and I thought, you know, what room am I in? Because my understanding and my knowledge and my experience tells me that those words to do with building are just, and I don't know the context in which he was speaking, but certainly with non-conforming products, we've had so much coverage, we've had fires, deaths in Sydney, around the world, and here they are right now, and they're 10, 11 and 12 November, and then we've got Lend-Lease saying that they don't want to spend money on repairs, that they would rather put some safety measures in place and stop people smoking and keep the cladding on there. So,
with drones.
Sorry?
With drones as well. Having drones to surveil people.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
Having drones to surveil people.
Oh yes, that's right, and the drones. And then I've got an article, this appeared on the 11th of November in Sourceable, which is an industry online website, and it's by a chap called Mark Whitby, who's a retired architect, recently retired, and very experienced, and he talks about the fact that everyone's involved in terms of how these things begin. So you've got the soil testers, the engineers, both knowing, for example, it's a P site, it's a problem site. These days you can actually look on a computer program, find the block of land, and you can tell straight away what it is. You don't even have to go out there and do tests. So 10,000 slab heave in Melbourne, that means demolition jobs, brand new. 85% of new apartments in New South Wales in 2012 after a 2-year study by the University of New South Wales, and they said defective, brand new defective. I've checked out with strata people in Melbourne and they're saying something similar. Now, I was going to go on to consequences for the community, but if you'd rather, I'd just stop there.
Okay, yes, thank you, Ms Payton. And Senator Madigan.
Thank you, Ms Payton. In your evidence earlier there, you mentioned about the same cladding that was used, I'm assuming, on the Lacrosse Tower at the South Bank. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
You're saying is being currently fixed to the Royal, what was it, the Royal Women's Hospital, Royal Melbourne?
Yes, and the...
Which one was it, Royal Melbourne? Or
the Royal Women's.
Royal Women's.
And...
and this is still being fixed after the Lacrosse fire in Melbourne at South Bank.
So the Royal Women's, I understand, is open and functioning. It requires $250 million, but the Cancer Centre is not open. It's being built under construction.
So it's the cancer. Which, could you just for the record hands that, which building, which cancer?
It's called the Comprehensive Cancer Centre, and it's in that hospital precinct in Melbourne.
Okay.
Near the Melbourne
and
Hospital.
that's currently being built,
Yes.
you're saying?
Now, Senator Madigan, if I could just interrupt for a second. Now, Ms Payton, you are referring to an article there, I think.
Yes.
Could you give us the source of that?
Yes, it's Catherine Towers in the Australian on the 9th of November, and it's called Builder Lend Lease in Frame over Hospital Cladding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So the point that you're making for the committee is that we had the Lacrosse fire in Melbourne that everybody's aware of at South Bank, and that currently the cancer facility that's being built in the hospital precinct in Melbourne has got the same cladding being affixed to, installed on a public hospital whilst we speak.
Yes, John.
Would you, for the benefit of the committee, be able to give us that table, that article with the Secretariat? That'd be appreciated. For the benefit of the committee, Ms Payton, could you give us examples of non-conforming, faulty, dodgy building products that you know of through your association and how they've affected
the ones that I'm most familiar
affected,
with...
members of your group, whether
Yes.
it's steel or reinforcement or glass or whatever it may be.
Yes, we've got... just recently we've linked up with the strata associations in a loose arrangement, and so I'm becoming much more aware, and I have a particular person who manages he's an owner-manager for 300 apartments, and he is just inundated, as are all the others, and they can't actually manage their core business, which is managing the apartments, because they're dealing with solicitors and they're off to VCAT and so on and so forth. And the system is set up so badly. There's, for example, if we look at the Lacrosse building, and this friend of mine is in the same situation. They've just had emergency orders placed on them. It's the same with houses. So if you build and the roof blows off and you've taken over the very next day, so it's your first day as owner, the emergency order from the council will come on you. And in effect, I know of an owner who had the roof blow off and the windows fall down, and that very day the builder had taken her and was in VCAT saying, you should pay me, that is finished, it's secure, it's done, and here it is. And then they had to get someone to come within a couple of hours, or a very heavy fine. So the whole system is that you pay as the owner, You must pay even if the stage is defective. This is the defective legislation. We've got unfair contracts that breach the unfair contract laws. We've got no enforcement at all. We've got registered builders who can't build, surveyors who don't survey, enforcers who don't enforce, warranty insurance you can't claim. Stratas haven't got any insurance, but it's no different. 99% of domestic building can't claim. And it took us 9 years to find out the statistics because we couldn't get them. We found out in 2011 that owners had paid $88 million that year in premiums in Victoria because they're compelled to. And they paid out that year $108,000 to 3 owners. All of that money then went off, half it to HIA and MBA and the other half at the time to various insurers, but from 2010 on it's VMIA and QBE. And this is the problem. We've got vested industry interests who are not industry interests. They are much-for-profit companies. They derive their income from insurance, from training courses, from people getting awards and rewards. In the case of the Building Commission, came out in the Ombudsman's report that $1 million had been handed from the Building Commission to the HIA and the NBA over 3 years. Back in 2007 or 9, one of the two, they put into the Building Act in Victoria that it could accept donations, gifts and property. That's since been taken out in 2012 because I pressured very heavily. But the culture of these organisations, they've changed the name, nothing else has changed. All the registered people are still registered. They actually did less enforcement last year than the previous year when it was the Building Commission.
Yes, could we ask, just for the benefit of the committee, what product was it that what product are you saying that failed with the roof blowing off of the house?
I think the roof was not the failure probably of the materials in that case. It was the failure of the workmanship. In the case of the windows, it was the whole house and the structure.
But it wasn't identified that it was actually product?
I don't think in that case it was, John, no.
Right. But can you give the committee examples of your members who've identified faulty, dodgy, non-compliant, not fit for purpose building products, whether it be, for instance, insulation?
Sometimes they fit into the category that you're saying. They're made of the wrong sort of materials. They're cheaper, etc. Like MDF, for example. I know a house where Malaysian MDF was brought in, and when I got a surveyor to go a very ethical surveyor to go and have a look, he knew straight away because it didn't have the Australian stamp. And I think it was thinner and, not the same quality. But that building had everything that was wrong, whether it was technically in your non-conforming product category or whether it was missing the Rio, which it was in the concrete, not proper drainage, not proper electrical, unsafe. I know lots of houses where there have been fires, and that's faulty workmanship, and also it can be that they've put in the wrong wiring or they've let the apprentices do it, but you can't get anyone to act. One lady, her house caught fire, and we spent 8 months asking Consumer Affairs, the builder, the Building Commission, the electrician, begging, because the lights were flickering, begging, please, please. The night it went up in smoke, we find out all the people come, they say, oh yes, we'll get on to the electrician. He never stepped in the house. He sent the 2 apprentices and he signed the certificate. So everything is self-certification. Who would know? Well, everything was wrong in that house. Everything was non-compliant in the wiring. But this is actually really common because not only does no one check, there's no penalty. You can do it 25 times, 100 times. People buy their licence, sell their licence. It's just a money-making machine.
So no consequences?
No consequences at all. I've got letters where the Building Practitioners Board has written to owners and said, Look, we had that builder in once. We had him in twice. Never again. Once you've done two, you can rob two banks. The rest you're off scot-free. I've got two owners with that in writing. I've got stories that would go on forever, and it is all linked in, because when you don't have any proper registration, proper regulation, proper enforcement, proper penalty, and on the other hand, you leave consumers without a voice. There's no ombudsman, there's no FOS for our insurance, it's exempt, everything's exempt. We have no representative anywhere on any committee. We write letters, we beg for meetings, we put submissions in, and we even apply for board positions, and everything goes in the bin. So we've been made not to exist, which is why we have no rights and why the other side can do exactly what they have done with us. And we have 750,000 people every year in Australia suffering billions of dollars of financial damage. And I can extrapolate that based on the statistics from Victoria, knowing that it's the same across the country, and knowing that in Victoria in 2010, which is as far back as, or as recent as I can go, we were looking at close on to $4 billion for 1 year.
And of that figure, how much would you attribute to non-conforming building products?
I wouldn't be able to say, because there's been nothing done. All I can say is everything's non-conforming. It's a total non-compliant industry, from the workmanship, the products. For example, in my own case, we didn't know, but we had foundation problems. But before we found that out, we had $200,000 of defects.
Can you tell us about your case on the record? I know but you know, in the context of this inquiry for products, what happened to you and your family in terms of? I just think it's important to get it on the Hansard.
Well, what happened was...
How many years ago does this go back now?
I'm sorry?
It goes back a number of years now, does it not?
Yes, we took over in 2008, and we'd been locked out. We found out later we'd been given approval certificates and paid when they weren't approved. We couldn't get hold of the insurance, and no one can. So you can't find out that you've got no warranty insurance, and we would never have built.
Now, Ms. Payton, I am interested in your story, but I'm particularly interested in the role which non-conforming building products played in the story.
I can just tell you, in our house we got seconds floorboards, seconds bricks, we got an air conditioner that was undersized, so it was non-conforming for the job. It wasn't fit for purpose because it was too small. We got no paint, we got seconds plaster, we've got articulation joints and subfloor vents that don't allow the place to breathe. With exception of electrical and plumbing, there's nothing right with our house. And then the foundations. And again, this is to do with non-compliance, because they should have gone deeper and they should have called it a P site. But everybody did a deal and everybody took more money. And this is just normal. So whether it's non-conforming products, whether it's non-conforming workmanship, whether it doesn't make any difference. It's all the same system. And it's because if it's standards, the industry sit on the standards committee. If it's registration board, there's no consumers. And the people who are in the industry keep swapping. So we've got the building lawyer who wrote the legislation, was the chair of the Building Practitioners Board. We've got the director of regulatory compliance at the Building Commission, who becomes the director of HIA. And the director of HIA becomes the Building Practitioners Board chair, and they just go, and I could give you thousands of these examples. The public and private interests are linked, and they're one network, and there's 200 key people, and they keep moving around, and we can't even get a voice. And that's the only reason I've done this, because I visited a couple yesterday in their late 60s, and they look like they've come from Biafra. It's been going on 10 years, and the woman can barely speak, and the man's... This is what I see every day. That's if they're alive. Many of them have suicided, heart attack, stroke, but not all from the building disaster, from what happens after, when they go to VCAT and they find their lawyer and the other lawyer and the building consultants all working together. The building consultants are not qualified. They're not registered. I've told the VBA for 10 years almost, and they've known since 2002. So we've got hundreds, and this is across the country. People yesterday were a shopkeeper. Today they're a building inspector. Illegal. But they go and charge you $20,000 to look at your house. And there's nothing you can do about it, and you don't know because you don't understand the system. So every part of the system is corrupted, that's all I can say. And the poor building person, and like I was saying before, it may not be that it affects you right now, but say your daughter goes across to play with someone's daughter at the lacrosse building and that night it catches on fire and you thought it had nothing to do with me. I don't care about the lacrosse people, but it does concern us all. And the non-conforming products are just part of the entire industry that is all non-conforming. Otherwise, you couldn't have 40% of people in 2010 who suffered financial damage that year as building consumers in Victoria. The national average that year was 28%.
What's your source for that?
The source is Consumer Affairs report, Nick.
Yeah.
Independently done, not by Consumer Affairs.
No. So basically, and it varies, doesn't it? It varies between, it might be a couple of $1,000s for a small rectification to something that's quite catastrophic financially for those people.
Yes, all the people I know, though, if you get a good builder, and there are some good builders, I'm not saying there are not, then you don't have problems. If there's a bit of paint missing, they'll come back and fix it. But if you get someone who wants to cut corners, then there'll always be catastrophic stories. I've got a place, a young woman with 2 young children, she lives in Werribee, 10 years, and the place literally, I'm not kidding, falls down. Cornices, cracks, nothing opens, closes. The children have had things fall 1 minute after they were at the play table. There's mould, there's insul fluff. It's totally unsafe.
In the context of this inquiry, if I may, Chair, just very quickly, because we're running out of time. In the context of this inquiry, we've heard from a number of witnesses. HIA have given, and the CMFEU have given very good submissions, I think, in terms of the problems with the system, how it must be much more rigorous, there must be remedies. You shouldn't allow this stuff in the first place, and it goes back to Senator Madigan's bill of a couple of years ago on Australian standards. What I want to understand is that at the moment, if a consumer is stuck with a non-conforming, non-compliant building product, in other words, it might have passed the test, but it's not being used appropriately. Either way, the two get conflated together. Are you saying that consumers just don't have a chance? That's what you're saying? That's
what I'm saying. So take the lacrosse building, the owners will have to pay. Take these other apartments.
Not the developer?
No. That's why they've put the order already. The council, Melbourne Council, did that last week. Put the orders on the owners to pay, because that's how it works. Stratas don't have any insurance. We have insurance.
Well, Stratas do have insurance for a whole range of things.
No, not for owners. Maybe construction insurance, but nothing for owners. So when you take over, and I might add in a strata, and this is really important because I think about 50% of new buildings now are stratas. So we've got this really woeful situation where they're going up everywhere. But the other thing that has come to my attention is that when you buy off a plan, not a building that's already built, you are not allowed even to step into that building or see that apartment until it's completed and you've paid your money. Now, in domestic building, it's much the same. With our builder, he just locked us out, and we kept saying, but we should be allowed in. Well, I'm not letting you in. Oh, but you're not built.
So that sounds like might be the case in Victoria. Is that necessarily the case in other states?
I would think it would be. But you couldn't quote me on that, on the stratas. But I suspect it would be. I've had, just recently, I've had a woman who's come over from Perth. She's living in Tassie. Her kid home was built in Victoria, and she's had a council demolition job on it. I haven't had time yet to go to the suppliers, but they're a very big company based in Victoria, which will make it a Victorian case. And I said to her, why are you living over there? And she said, because the relatives are putting me up because it's unsafe to live in the house. And these are kit homes selling for around $160,000, so probably lower income point, I would think. But I haven't had time to follow that up because I've had people on suicide watch with them and other major things happening, and this is every day. And that's because it doesn't matter what we say where. This is all repeated. And it's because there's a total imbalance of power where a few people and a few big, powerful interests have control of everything. So literally my case where we went to VCAT, spent $80,000 and left, we only did that because the system otherwise would have left us there for 5 years and another $500,000. And when we worked that out, and then we looked back and said, what could we have done as consumers? What didn't we do? Well, I can tell you there's nothing you can do. I rang a volume builder the other day and said, I'm seriously wanting to commit to buy. I want to see the contract and I want to see the insurance policy. I've had 4 phone calls, the last one for 40 minutes. They will not give it to me. I am not allowed to be informed. Therefore, I can't do any more homework than I did, which was registered builder, award-winning, HIA award winner, insured, but I didn't know I couldn't claim it, and I had a solicitor check the contract. So this issue in political speak is called a hot potato. In media speak, it's called it's not sexy. And in consumer land, we're all dying, and I mean dying. In my own organisation, 25%, I did a survey, 25% have either attempted suicide or they've thought about it. They've been on the road, I want to drive into the tree. Because when this happens, it never stops. Those couples are in VCAT 10 years later, the one I just told you in Werribee.
I'm just interested in your organisation, Ms Payton. Can you tell us a bit more about the Victorian Building Action Group and who are your members?
I would love to. This is the 3rd organisation I've been with, and our aim is firstly to try and inform consumers, and we're in the process of building a new website. We want them to at least know the risks. We won't be able to stop them because of the legislation, the unfair contracts, the junk insurance, the no enforcement, the everything else, but we want those who want to protect themselves to at least have half a chance to either own a build or not build, or I don't know what else they can do, because you can't, the 40%, 50% chance is horrendous. The other thing we would like to do is make our website a place of information, because, for example, in Victoria, the Building Commission took down, the VBA, I should say, took down the 20 years of the Victorian Building Commission's history. You can't find one document to see it ever existed. You can't find any information about inspectors, surveyors, what they're meant to do. Even the annual reports, you can't find a thing. So we're going to be a resource. We're going to have, we hope, video, TV, print, all these reports from the Ombudsman. If anyone wanted to know anything about Victoria, the Ombudsman's report of 2012, but you must be sitting down or you'll fall off the seat. It's so shocking. But our aim is to help, and we try and help people where we can, and I have been successful, but most successful as a support rather than getting, one time I did get a whole house back at VCAT. I went as the advocate, and I've had a few little things, but primarily the family doesn't speak to you and your friends don't when it goes on for years. And so that's our role, to try and...
Thank you very much, Ms Payton, and thank you very much for coming before us and giving your evidence.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for all the work that you're doing at the moment.
Thank you.
So we will suspend for a period of time.